Good morning, everyone. My name is Danielle Bragge. I am the Vice President for the Headhunters, and thank you for joining us today. Today is actually the last in our 2017 webinar series, and we're really excited about this topic as we've had a lot of requests for this particular topic. For those of you that have had the opportunity to be on some of our other webinars, or did not have the opportunity to be on some of our webinars, they are all loaded onto our website, and we've got some other exciting topics. This year we've done a number of we've had a number of interesting guests with great content. We've talked about diversity in the workforce. We've talked about business grants. We've talked about how to increase productivity. We've talked about how to develop your own leadership presence, how to hire for safer workers, and effective terminations, just to name a few. And as I said, today is going to be another very interesting topic. But before we get started, I do have a couple of housekeeping items for you. There is a question and answer period at the end of the presentation. So if you have any questions, please type them into the chat panel, and we'll try and address as many as possible at the end. An email is going to be sent out tomorrow to all of our attendees with a link to the recording of this webinar. There'll also be a copy of the, obviously, the video content as well as the audio. And then again, a big thank you to our guests today. So today's topic is on how to engage your multi-generational workforce. We're going to discuss the current reality of workforces, and some of you might already be experiencing this. We have about 4 to 5 generations working together side by side. So we're going to give you some tips on how to manage and engage these multi-generational teams, in particular focusing on the 2 new generations. Some of you might know something about the millennials. I myself have some millennials in my family, and the new and upcoming generation that's just getting ready to enter the workforce. They are called the digital natives. So I'd like to welcome Tracie, and I'm going to introduce you very quickly to Tracie. She certainly has a wealth of information. Tracie Moser is a senior organizational development consultant with Logan HR. And Logan HR Management consults in career transition, organizational development, and compensation. And they've helped hundreds of organizations with their human capital needs, and in fact has hosted one of our webinars in the past. Tracie herself brings over 20 years of design and delivery experience and expertise in the field of learning and development. She specializes in leadership, team, and career development with a focus on creating long-lasting relationships with her clients. She's architected a number of leadership development programs in Canada, US, Australia, and has worked across various different industries. Tracie is a certified coach from the Coaches Training Institute, trained in organizational relationship systems coaching from the Center for the Right Relationship, and is a certified NLP trainer. She's also a lifelong learner and development professional. And earlier in her career, she also attained a Development Dimensions International Certified Facilitator status. Wow, that's a mouthful, Tracie. She also was a Toronto College instructor in Adult Learning Certificate Program, and has authored a chapter in a published book on psychological typing. And so over to you, Tracie, and welcome.
Thank you, Danielle. Really appreciate that intro, and welcome everyone to today's webinar. So let's get started with our agenda. So first of all, we're going to start with a poll question. Which generation are you? Talk about factors that shape a generation. Look at Gen X, Millennial, and Digital Native influences, growing up in pop culture, strengths and career needs, and tips for engaging the Millennials and Digital Natives. All right, so our outcomes for me, for you, are become aware of the factors that shape a generation, and how to really understand how those childhood strengths of each of the generations show up in professional strengths, really connecting those dots, what those generations are seeking in employment, and also looking at possible corporate solutions to attract, grow, and retain your employee base. So first of all, let's go. Which generation are you? Who is on the phone today? Please select yours and submit. So we have Boomers 46 to 64, Gen X 65 to 80, Millennials or Gen Y 81 to 97, and Digital Natives 1998 to 2016. There's usually within generations a couple of years of numbers shifting, like sometimes millennials say, oh, we started in 1980 versus 81. But generally, those are the most common dates between all of the generations. So we have 31% Boomers, Gen X, 38, Millennials, 31, and Digital Natives, none. Okay, that's not surprising. But yeah, pretty equal distribution. So let's take a look at the first here, factors that shape a generation. And there's really, historically there's been two, but I've added a third because it really has changed the way we live and work and even parent. So first of all, the events that shape a generation is the events that you were experiencing in your coming of age. So those are mostly your teen years. Parenting style of the generation, which we know has shifted over year, and we'll take a look at that, and the technology that you got raised with or socialized with. So let's take a look first at some of the events. Now, some of the life-defining events for Boomers when they were youngsters were Cold War, the moon landed, the transistor invented, Gen X, end of Cold War. This was Live Aid, the rise of personal computing, the information age. Millennials, the 9/11 attack, Iraq War, the rise of social media, and the Digital Natives, which is the post-Great Recession. So we're talking the 2008, Arab Spring, and Arab Spring was the event when a young Tunisian, Mohamed Bouazizi, set himself on fire after he was banned from selling fruit to earn a living. And so that was something that generation's sort of life-defining event. And of course, the rise of artificial intelligence for them. The next piece of it is the parenting style. And so the Boomers came in with more of that traditional parenting style. Dad went to work, mom stayed at home, father knows best kind of moment. Gen X had one of the more permissive parenting styles in the history of parenting, and we'll talk a little bit more of that. But essentially, Gen X kids, the style of the parents, like you're kind of on your own. Millennials parenting style were sort of the groovy parents. This is where the parents were friends. It's one of the only generations to actually not openly rebel against their parents. And for the Digital Natives, where their parents are mostly Gen Xers, we call them sort of more of a nesting parent style. They got married later, they had children later, but they always made sure that one parent was always at home, and that gender also wasn't a factor of who stayed at home. Looking at some of the technology, the third piece of like how we differ. You know, Boomers got raised on television, Gen X from personal computer to smartphone to augmented reality and virtual reality for the Digital Natives. And if you're not sure what augmented reality is, you're not alone looking it up. It was where a view of the physical real-world environment whose elements are augmented or supplemented by computer-generated sensory input. Remember when everybody was wandering around the planet chasing Pokemon Go? That's augmented reality. So Boomers, so what do we call ourselves? Well, Boomers are digital immigrants because that generation's been immigrating towards technology. They weren't raised with it. Gen X was pretty close from an age perspective, so we were more the adopters. But the Millennials coming in with all of the social media and all the different kinds of apps that we have today, they were really the digital developers. And basically where Digital Natives are born into, they're Digital Natives. I mean, nothing is new for them here. This is all old hat. So some of our tech pastimes, you know, watching TV, surfing the net, playing video games, streaming music. So this is why the third element of what shapes a generation is really important, because it talks about not only how we spend our time, our pastime, what we're used to, but also how we'll also behave in the workplace. So let's take a look at Gen X, the background, the pop culture, emerging strengths, and their career. So this was the generation of latchkey kids born during one of the most patently anti-child phases in history. Welcome, Gen X friends. This is where our friends were our family, and most Gen Xers will tell you that their friends are their family still to this day. We got raised in one of the highest divorce and abortion rates in dual income families, the most permissive parenting habits in history, feminism and women going to work, often viewed as intrusive obstacles to their parents' self-exploration. Average quality time with the parent was about 15 minutes a day. Who's heard the phrase, go outside and play? We'll see you when it's dark. Xers found themselves in the highest child poverty rates, and later in their lives, the lowest wage and homeowner rate since the Great Depression. First generation to not be better off than their parents. And lastly, and parents laid off in the 80s recession, and that had a profound impact on them because they realized loyalty wasn't a thing anymore. So what were people watching when Gen X was being raised? Well, first of all, this was one of the lower decades of general rated movies. So the adults were watching evil child movies. So we've got Rosemary's Baby, The Exorcist, Carrie, The Omen, It Lives Again, Children of the Corn. From that, we were also watching, what were we watching though? And it really started talking about Breakfast Club, Slackers, Reality Bites, Fight Club, Heathers, Clerks. And it was, kind of defined as the slacker generation of movies, but also like so the parents were watching movies that the kids weren't about kids. And this was actually in Gen X time. This was the first time Disney ever laid off animators. They didn't have enough children's movies to make. So professional strengths emerging from childhood. Now, kind of think of this generation of sort of be on its own, my friends are my family, really kind of, there's a lot of data around self-parenting that comes out of this generation. If it's sort of meant to be, it's up to me. And more of a cynical generation overall based from that. But there's a lot of strengths that came out of the Gen X group from childhood. And one is that they have, because of their accelerated contact with the real world, it's made Gen X resourceful and hardworking. They understand systems incredibly well and how to navigate systems and moving around them because they've been doing it for so long. Their distrust of institutions also prompted Gen X to value self-reliance and to develop strong survival skills and the ability to handle whatever comes their way with resilience. Like I said, Gen X had that self-parenting place, kind of making all their own decisions for a very long time. They're very scrappy and resilient as a result. Because of a sense of an alienation from their immediate surroundings, coupled with rapidly expanding technology, has allowed Gen X to look outward in ways no generation before could or did. They operate comfortably in today's world, global and digital. So Gen X is the last generation to understand what it was to live and really live or straddle between the pre-digital and post-digital era. Their preference for alternatives and early experience in making their own way left Gen X inclined to be very innovative, tend to look for a different way forward. They're very creative. Free agency has led Gen X to one of the strongest arenas of financial success as a generation, their entrepreneurial achievements. And they really did start defining entrepreneurs with not only in the digital era, but really looking at sort of that independent streak, which served them well. Childhood made Gen X fiercely dedicated to being good parents, prompting Gen X to raise important questions about the way we all balance and work with commitments and beyond the corporation. This is where work-life balance first started coming more into question when Gen X came into the workforce. The Boomers were truly known as the workaholics, and when Gen X came through, it was like, you know what, we don't want to work all that many hours and staying for the morning, noon, and night. And so we started to see a lot of more of the work-life balance kind of policies come into play. What does Gen X want from a career at this stage? This is a great question because it really does depend on the individual and where they are in their life at the life stage. And there's 6 different areas here where you could be looking at what Gen X wants. It could be about something with value. It could be still upward mobility, individual expertise, winning teams, maybe more wealth, maybe just wants flexible support. I want to stay home more with my family, or it's all economic gains. It really depends on where they are in their life and how that's going. And in one of the books that I'll reference at the end, there's a really good, it dives into each of these buckets, and to have questions about which ones are, it helps Gen X think which path is for them at this point. And it's something they probably haven't done a lot of thinking of overall. I met quite a few different people through coaching, and it's really, everyone's quite different from the Gen X perspective. It's like, I definitely want to go into want to be the Gen executive. For others, it's still contributing member of a winning team. So, or looking at, it's not really a priority. So I get it. Gen X is very all over the map, as it always has been. And so that book that I referenced at the end will help you work with your Gen X employees to figure out which path is for them. Let's take a look at the Millennials. And the Millennials, sort of called the selfie generation, the social living online, the we generation. And this is, when they came in from a Gen X perspective, because we didn't have cell phones or didn't post things that we were doing because we pretty much wanted to fly under the radar. This generation really marked the beginning of a whole new set of parenting styles, and really shifted the way that this generation grew up and went into the workplace. It was almost unrecognizable from the one before. First of all, this generation was raised with more laws protecting them than any other generation in history. Raised with this protectiveness, helicopter parent term emerged. So we're talking, seat belts, helmet laws, child seats. Like, you can't be this, you have to be this weight and you have to be this age before you can get out of that. There was a law or a guideline for pretty much everything. This generation versus the one previous was, encouraged to talk openly about their feelings. How does this make you feel? They were very much consulted with by adults. They were told that they were very special, that they were wanted, versus the Children of the Corn type of movies from the previous one, but they were very special. They were sheltered. This is the generation for whom play date was made. Highly collaborative with authority figures. They're not intimidated. And this is one of the shockers that came into the workplace, is that they didn't have that sort of deferential respect for their managers or their VPs, because they were raised and socialized with adults. Gen X was socialized by their peers. This one was with teachers and parents and other parents. And so with that in mind, they saw them more as an equal versus someone to defer to. And because of that, obviously they were encouraged to participate in family and household decisions at a much earlier age. So the average 10-year-old was picking out the vehicles and, what do we want to buy for the house? Do we want this one or do we want that one? I mean, they had as much purchasing power as a 16-year-old in the 60s, and that much decision power as well. And this is where, marketing understood that really well, that this is the largest generation born in history, which is millennials, besides their boomer parents. They had a lot of purchasing power. And this is the one thing I think that people don't get, but it's really critical to really understanding this generation, in my opinion, is that there was 9,000 books were written about children and self-esteem when the millennials were children, versus 500 from all previous decades. If you think about that and how much the parents were focusing on them and to raise them with self-esteem, this has actually been dubbed the self-esteem movement. But when it got to the workplace, it became sort of the self-entitled movement, because we know, the way even children's sports were being played out and changed, in that, everyone got a trophy for participating. There was no first, second, and third. And there is a book called The Trophy Kids Grow Up, and it was interesting because they were used to being, as children, just rewarded for showing up. And so that's where that piece of, I think, self-entitlement kind of persona follow them through? So let's take a look at some of the movies for the millennial era and how these kids were raised. So move over Stephen King. Here we have Steven Spielberg kicking off the generation with E.T., where the child is rescuing the alien, and it's all about the children being as heroes. And so most of the movies that they came through with the Disney, lots of G-rated movies, because they understood, of course, they were bringing their parents back to the movie theater, because quality time was really important as a parenting style with the boomers and their kids. So what did they start bringing to the workplace from their professional strengths? Well, this generation's social consciousness upbringing really pushing the envelope on corporate or social responsibility, and will expect employers to do their part. So, you know, they were doing fundraisers. I remember listening to what kids were doing. There was another fundraiser. They were doing this, so they became very socially aware, very young, not only for poverty, but for the planet, for anything. And so they came in with that level of responsibility into the workplace, and are looking for it. Of course, we talked about them being raised with a high level of self-esteem and socialized with adults over friends. They are confident, and they're willing to take risks, and are looking for a rapid career progression. The average will be that 2.5 to 3 year window before they're looking for their next promotion. This is not a long window of time. So from that perspective, they need to be learning, they need to be seeing their careers move forward. Again, they have a high self-esteem, they feel they can do anything. Their biggest thing is they got to make a difference. So their rapid progression is a necessity for them. A generation raised on collaborative technology, so they value collaboration, and sees networks as problem-solving tools. So Google and other platforms such as Slack are examples. They process at lightning speed, so they're looking for ways to solve their issues. You know, why have a question when there's Google there? A generation for the term playdate was created. So this is interesting because they're looking for both structure and variety. So because they had lots and lots of activities to fill in, they're used to the structure, but they're also used to the variety piece of it. So they're looking at, you know, they see themselves as strong multitaskers because of that, and with work being one more thing to fit in. Millennials were involved in a lot of team sports, the trophy kids. So a sense of, they're coming in with a sense of teamwork. You know, in Gen X days, you had a date. You know, there's like group dates for millennials when they were younger. And so they started shifting into that workplace, you know, sharing workplace, open design spaces, have them in mind because they like to have that open collaboration. They are drivers and early adopters of technology and will push for and need evolved information technology platforms. For example, Facebook Office over SharePoint for information sharing. And those are some of the real strengths that they've come through with. And so what are they looking for in a career now? Well, and a lot of this is from like the books that I've referenced at the back, but you know, 91% of millennials expect to stay in a job for less than 3 years. So this rapid progression piece and sitting sort of too far in the background for them, they're trying to push their envelope forward. The number one reason millennials leave an organization is lack of career opportunity. At least 75% wants a mentor. Corporate social responsibility, 84% of millennials say that making a difference is more important to them than professional recognition. If you look at Simon Sinek, and you know, his whole thing is around the question of why. But you know, he jokes with his millennial audience and saying, "Oh my gosh, you're 26 and you haven't changed the world yet." There is something in the psyche of that generation about making a big impact. And also because they've been sheltered and feedback with teachers and home and so forth, that recognition is really important to them. And I know a lot of the managers that have been out there, when they saw them coming in, it's like, how much more feedback does that generation need? And but they were socialized with feedback. The kind of the quote like "good job," which is they've heard way too many times. But they thrive in organizations that provide robust opportunity and recognition for their efforts. Even I heard from a colleague that I think it was Danielle actually, or someone said that people schedule their time in their calendars to give feedback, to remember to actually do that, because with Gen X being sort of their frontline managers, well, we never got feedback. It doesn't make sense for us. And so we actually have to schedule something like that in, like, oh, right, I should say something, because we're not used to having it ourselves. And so for a Gen X leader, it's hard to kind of wrap your head around to doing this. They like entrepreneurial environments. This is where, the tech world has been really good for them. They came of age during the .com era, and thus see themselves as a startup or senior leaders right away. They either want to start a company. The hero is Mark Zuckerberg here, starting Facebook at 23 and now being a billionaire. So there's a lot of role models that came out there from their demographic, their age group that, started successful companies or are running successful companies. So very different, again, from how they look at their career trajectories. Work-life balance. They want to fit in all their focuses in life, and thus a liberal vacation is essential for them. I think anything starting less than 3 weeks a year is sort of out of date at this point for that generation, and even the next one coming up. But that's a huge, huge draw for them. Taking a look at some case studies, this is from Fortune, and they started the top 100 companies for millennials to work for, and have just highlighted the top 3. But if you go to fortune.com, I think it started like either last year, it started in 2016. And so here's a few highlights. And I've sort of linked them to sort of their career development, like the career that they're looking for. Ultimate Software invests its employees by providing all training and tools necessary to be successful. I'll work hard because they never doubt my ability. Management believes in every employee from the start. So that's around career development. That one links there quite well. Here's the rapid progression one. I just turned 23 and I have responsibilities that far exceed my nominal level of experience. Management trusts us, fully believes in the ideas that millennials are the future, which buys into that generation quite well. Not a lot of companies can offer that type of intangible asset to recent graduates looking to jumpstart their career. And the third one was around work-life balance. Well, they trust us. Again, trust is a big piece of this, that we'll go the extra mile. Long gone are the day that we need to prove ourselves, in a sense, where Gen X was going from proving. But we'll go the extra mile when what needs to be accomplished more. And we're allowed to work from home, come in late, and leave early, and take days off as needed. So, of course, millennials are now becoming some parents themselves, in a sense. So this is even going to be more and more relevant for them. Let's go to the next poll question. What types of programs or cultural philosophies have you focused on to attract, grow, and retain the millennial generation? So formalized career development is great from that perspective. Career management training, learning and development is a big piece of this. You've got maybe internal coaches, a good corporate citizen profile, charities or causes supported. How do you interact with the world? Robust recognition and feedback, strong work-life balance practices. So again, with them understanding that, how they were brought up to what they're looking for, a formalized career development program is going to be absolute clutch with them. I've done a lot of work in this area, and from systems to training, it is essential. It looks like from the poll result, kind of split 40% for the first 3, but strong work-life balance practices at 60%. Excellent. Take a look at the digital natives, the generation who could swipe before they could talk. The background, pop culture, emerging strengths again, and what are they looking for a career? And again, just as different as I think Boomers and Gen X was, and Gen X and Millennials, the digital natives are sort of like a whole other ball of yarn. And a lot of the data here is coming from this book called Gen Z at Work. One of the few that I've read. It's probably one of the best ones, and I said we'll list them at the end again. But brilliant, lots of excellent information. So this is the hashtag generation, not the pound key, because that's for us old folks, and also the emoji generation. So let's take a look at them from 98 to 2016. So they're raised on technology and see it as a part of everyday life versus something to be in awe of. So like I said, they could swipe before they could speak. How many kids have you seen have their own, like the iPads, playing them at like 1 or 2? They are a generation of do-it-yourselfers. This generation of DIY YouTube pragmatists raised by their independent Gen X parents consider trade-offs and long-term balances. We'll talk more about that as well when it comes into career. But they live in the phygital, which is a really new term that I hadn't heard before this research. But they're the first generation born where every physical aspect, people and places, has a digital equivalent. Think about Twitter. So if you want to go into some sort of conversation, you can use hashtag Twitter to join that conversation. GPS maps. They've never driven without a GPS map, or have never used a paper map for that matter. Think about Pokemon Go again. It's sort of that overlay between the physical world and the real world. Hyper-custom, they worked at defining their own brand for the world to know and see individuality as essential to their success. So they have an Instagram following. They are cultivating their own brand. And they've also used to getting things hyper-custom. And you know this today, it's like, which sites do you follow? Like, you edit your news out for the most part, or we can edit our news out. So this choose your preferences. Well, this group has had everything customized to them. So it's like, why wouldn't you choose? So hyper-custom. They're realistic, not idealistic, which is a big shift from the millennial to the digital native. They've experienced 2 recessions and fear disasters and tragedies on a continual basis, both war and climate. You know, when you think about those kids and their smartphones, and even us to this day, how much access to information we really do have. And even as a functioning adult in my 40s, I still find it difficult to filter out some of the things that I'm reading and how stressful some of that could be for those kids that are 10. You know, they're very driven. Parents drilled into them that participation is not a real reward, and that there are winners and losers. And they also have this thing called fear of missing out, which is very significant. It's about what's going on, and thus connect digitally with others around the clock. Their movies started to shift a little bit more. We still see the fun kids movies, but we're also seeing things like things around the planet, to the Arctic, A Beautiful Planet, oceans, Earth. And the other one that was a shift was, you know, the Hunger Games, Mockingjay, where kids were more competitive with each other versus more team-oriented. The professional strengths emerging from childhood for this group, well, they're the we economists, another new term, but it makes a lot of sense when you think about this generation grew up in a shared economy, like Uber, Airbnb has changed the landscape seemingly overnight. Co-op vehicles, you don't have to buy one, you can get one. eBay, why buy new if you can get it from someone else? And we expect, as a result, the creative entrepreneurship from this group will also be off the scales between the physical and digital world. They're looking at things much more differently. They've also been raised with kids with the world as being a scary place. So, and thus 60%, down from 89% of millennials, find themselves optimistic. As a result, they will be more pragmatic, like their Gen X parents are. They weren't born in a boom, they were born more in a bust. And so they are looking at, you've got to work for what you get, and you got to hold on to what you get, because it can be easily lost. They're growing up in a more diverse world. This generation is the most racially diverse generation in recent history, with the most diverse social circles. They will be expecting diversity, equity, and equality in the workplace as a result, a lot more than I think we've experienced in the past. Having been brought up on smartphones, generation dislike phone calls as well as emails. This is seen as an old school technology. It does not apply to face-to-face communications, which they do like. FaceTime and Skype, of course, is a face-to-face. The being fiscally conservative, pragmatic, coupled with the rising cost of education and preferences for learning online, this generation is more likely to pursue vocational or technical versus a 4-year degree. So this is important to know when you start thinking about future job postings, about what kind of education requirements are you looking at. Is the degree the default, or is it really necessary to be having in there? Because this generation is not going for the, let's find myself for a degree. They've already picked their career and then going to get the education to supplement it and open the door. So this would be a shift in thinking. A generation of task switchers, not multitaskers. They see them, because of the way that they've been living with tech, you know, they go from one application to the other. Like, so we're going to go like Instagram, Snapchat, texting, Facebook, whatever's on to whatever the next one is. So they're going to want to move from task to task quite quickly, multiple paths at the same time. About an 8-second attention span is what they're clocking at. So, and the fear and the reason for this, and it's going to continue, is the fear of missing out is at play here. Anxiety, which is anxiety that an exciting or interesting event may currently be happening elsewhere. So this is what they're calling about the task switchers, which is, it's important to see how that's going to play out in career as well, because of the way they see themselves growing their career. So there's some recruiting pieces here. One, of course, is that to attract that group, you're going to have a dynamic presence online with an updated website, or they could actually think you're out of business. You have a good social media presence as well. But 91% of digital natives say that a company's technological sophistication would impact their decision to work there. Again, this group has their phone on them at all times. There is now actually a certified phobia called nomophobia, which is the fear of not having your phone around you. And on average, they check it more than 150 times a day. Skype interviews and apps for recruitment like JobSnap. If you go to JobSnap, I think it's .com, which is really interesting, where employers and interviewees can swipe right and left on each other like Tinder. If there is a match, the interviewer creates a short video from their phones and sends it in. No resume. This is a think out of the box here. This is about using their phone for everything. So paper resumes, not necessarily a big fan. It doesn't really show their brand or uniqueness, but the video would, which is a very different way of thinking. This is another big piece of, and there is some companies doing it in that book, especially that I was referencing, but allow them to create their own job titles and even job descriptions. They're born into a world where everything is customized. So why would they be trying to why would you be trying to fit them into a block like everyone else? Because that's not how they see themselves or not how they've been working. 56% of them want to create their own job description, and 62% would rather customize their own career plan. And recruiting is going to need to look for innate abilities rather than skills applicable here, just because they also are looking at that multiple role piece. Here's one company, PwC, which we've heard all of before, but here's what their recruitment ad said. We understand how important the first steps outside of college are for your career, and recognize our responsibility in helping you reach your long-term career goals. Whether at PwC or beyond, that's why we work for you to design your own path, because you're truly the only person who knows what is best for your career. And of course, 65% of this group will work in jobs that don't currently exist today. You can see that customization that is coming back into the Gen X kids. So growing this generation, interesting as well. This is the YouTube generation, and they've been watching videos on everything. And of course, it's great because they're like 2 to 3 minutes. And they've been customizing searches to get the task done. So they are what we call DIY learners. So study, practice, study works for them really well. Short bits of information, give a chance to do it, and go back and get some more. Long workshops would unless it's incredibly relevant, isn't going to appeal to this generation. So you're going to have to rethink how you do training and development even at a larger degree. One of the quotes was, 1 in 10 of this generation claim they would rather read the full iTunes terms and conditions than attend formal training. That's saying something. 73% of this generation would like to be taught on a one-on-one basis. There's one of the tech companies out here called Clio have an internal coach for their employees as well. They're looking to expand that type of practice. You know, millennials were criticized for needing so much feedback, but this generation will be expecting the same. And more so because they've grown accustomed to being monitored and assume that you're being tracked all the time. Find my iPhone means kind of find my kid. But the smartphones, iTunes, everything's been like, oh, you might like this. Amazon, oh, welcome back. Snapchat now has GPS services and can track you. GPS location services, everything. They're used to being tracked and just see that, your feedback is one more version of this. Job rotations are essential for this generation and growing because they're accustomed to aligning information with their own worldview, that hyper-custom world. They're going to need to be exposed to other points of view and to other company parts of things that are happening in companies. So that job rotation piece, even if it's just a day in the life of, go spend a half a day with this person, a half a day with this part of the group, and so forth, so that they can get to understand what is going on in the organization overall. It'll also help them deal with that fear of missing out. And also, this group is straightforward feedback works for this group. Direct and to the point is appreciated, as this is what they're used to. Not a lot of Gen X parenting style has been quite direct, but they've also been doing sound bites. So as a supervisor going back for sound bites, this is going to work with them as well. Retaining. Competitors won't be your biggest fear here because the bigger challenge will be losing them to the do-it-yourself, the gig economy or the side hustle. 75% of the generation would like their side business to become their full-time job. And as long as the company doesn't compete with the employer, you might want to consider embracing and promoting their talents because it's probably the best recruitment and retention tool. People will look at full-time work and a side business as a viable option all the time. This generation is driven to win and not motivated by the participation award. You have to keep them growing at all times. See careers as a marathon, but that is a sprint. Health and wellness is also really important to this generation. Healthy food choices, gym memberships will be influential in attracting and retaining. Fiercely independent, like their Gen X parents, they will prefer privacy and flying under the radar versus being front and center like their millennial counterparts. Open shared spaces will not be their thing, but it will be good for them to experience because they need to figure out how to be back in team players. But 69% would rather have their own workspace again. It's starting to shift. Summary: to correct the perceived fight your way to the top the boomers experienced in their early adult life. They corrected it by raising their millennial children. To be collaborative team players who didn't have to place first, second, or third. The independent, pragmatic, free agency-minded Gen X, having seen the trophy kids focused on raising kids that once again would be independent, driven, and self-reliant. Now we have a generation of millennials and digital natives close in age, but as different as boomers and Gen X once again. Welcome to the fascinating world of generations. Some of the sources, what's next for Gen X? This is a great book if you have a Gen X workforce and you're trying to get them to understand what their career directions are. Of course, When Generations Collide, Trophy Kids, Millennials Incorporated, all really great books. For the millennials. Gen Z at Work, excellent read. And another one, Gen Z Goes to College, also really good. They have a lot of crossover information, but really does give you a really good sense of how they will be showing up in the workplace overall. And thank you. So, Danielle, questions or?
Great. Well, thank you, Tracie. That was really informative, particularly with the with the digital natives. That's a whole new thing for me, and it's going to be a whole new thing for a lot of employers. I think Kristen and I were working out that they're just coming into the workforce now, probably being the oldest around 20. And I can even see the different styles in the way, having raised, as I said to you earlier, having raised millennials in my home and raising digital natives, I can see the difference in the way I parent, which leads me to a couple of questions that we do have, specific to obviously not so much parenting style, but more to the workforce. But I'm going to start with one of the earliest questions that we had, and that was, recently, there's been a lot more information coming out of the Millennial micro generation born 1977 to 1983. Is this a term that's here to stay? I hadn't actually even heard of that term.
Yeah, Danielle, it's a way to differentiate what we would call cuspers, like within, and I think it used to be called cuspers, so if you were born within 5 years of that handoff era between like Gen X and Millennials, you would have qualities of both. And so the Millennial term has come out really just to sort of, I think, coin the name of what we've been experiencing for generations, is that because you're right on the mark, you'll have both qualities of some self-reliance, maybe really good team players, but it'll have more of a sort of it'll have more of a blend. But it does seem that the Millennial term is sticking overall. But it's been going on for a long time. Like even late boomers, born in close to the Gen X dates will have sort of qualities of both as well. But
great,
yeah,
thank you. Thank you. And I had a couple of other questions that came in from some of my clients via email. One of them was, given the millennials expect a promotion every 3 years, do they appreciate promotions based on merit? Any comments on that? Because if they're looking at, and I think the question really is about, if they're looking at being promoted every 3 years, do they understand that promotions are based on merit?
That's a good question, because I think it can be a bit of both. I mean, I know they're looking overall, of course, for rapid progression. That is definitely important to them. I also think it's kind of like coaching for credibility here. And if the leaders are having enough good feedback, enough conversations, because that whole, once a year, twice a year stuff isn't going to be working. You have to be constantly coaching for credibility and what it means to be credible. And if you're doing that well, I think you buy yourself some time as far as sort of rapid progression goes. A lot of course, the recognition and stuff as well, but it depends on the culture of your organization too. There's a lot of, I think, more factors than just merit.
Right. And I think that would be a bit of a learning curve for your boomers and your Gen X too, is communicating that effectively, to your point up front.
Yeah, it's like I said, it's a rapid moving organization. They want to make a mark quickly, and they want to rise quickly because of the way that they've been raised, and again, that whole self-esteem movement, and that they're strong as a generation. They've got the tech figured out. So again, I've heard the best term I heard is like coaching for credibility. Mm-hmm. And if you can get that through, versus just like, showing up is one thing, but doing a really good job is another. And that's how you get seen as being credible. I think that's really highly important to get through.
Great, thank you. And we have another question that's just come in. Digital natives want customized job titles and roles, but many organizations won't be able to provide this flexibility. How can organizations work with digital natives to engage and retain them in a structured, more formal work environment? Great question.
That is a difficult one for me to answer overall, because we are still embracing a lot of the old way of organizational structure, because we've got still like some of that top down, we've still got the org chart. we're seeing a lot, though, moving just organizational-wise into more team-based approaches like self-directed teams, self-managed teams to handle things. This is the biggest piece of organizational development work to come through. And I think that's where roles take on more of a certain, I guess, it's not about what can you do, it's not about what you're hired to do, what can you do, and in more of a self-directed team, you find about what they can do versus what they were hired. So if you've got opportunities to keep structure alive and well, which is one thing, but to have sort of like those, I would call cross-functional teams, cross-pollinated teams, agile teams, I think they're called a lot of companies, but if you can bring a team of individuals to work on a specific organizational problem, and then have them sort of define their own roles, what they're going to be working on in that, there's a way to sort of attract them into that kind of thinking and that way of doing. You don't have to keep the team going forever, but it's sort of a self-organizing team to solve the problem and then disband. That will be one way that you can keep that generation engaged in that, and so that it's like, oh, this is something really cool to solve or to work on. I'm going to work on this for a little bit and then I'll go back to my other job. Again, fear of missing out, but is the play, but they can, I think they would have a really good time with that. And the organization can get some really creative, innovative solutions out of it, depending on what the issue is.
Great, thank you. And I see we have a couple more questions coming in, but we are running out of time. So perhaps what we can do is try and address those directly, and we'll weed through a couple of those. But thank you, Tracie. You know, we want to keep everybody on schedule. I think all of us have found it really informative, really understanding, and a good reminder on how management is not a one-size-fits-all. It really does come down to understanding the various different generations that you have in the workforce. Couple of final housekeeping items. As I said earlier, we are going to be sending out an email to all of you tomorrow with a link to the recording. On occasion, it does go into your junk or your spam, so check to see after about 24 hours if you haven't received it and are waiting on it. You'll also see a survey that has just come up on your screen right now. We'd love some feedback. You know, we want to make sure that if we continue to do these, we are adding value to you. So please, if you could take the time to complete that, we'd very much appreciate it. And as I said, if you do have any additional questions relative to today's webinar, or you'd like to speak with us about any of your recruitment needs, please contact one of your recruiters at your local offices, Headhunters offices, or email us to the email address which will be up on your screen. And thanks again. This is our last webinar for 2017. We appreciate everyone who's participated so far. And again, another reminder that all of our 8 recordings are on our website, www.theheadhunters.ca. And thanks again, Tracie, and everyone that attended today.